there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisations.
Inside Buckingham Palace, a door closed that had remained open for 70 years. When Prince William walked out, he carried something that hadn't left King Charles's hands since the coronation. But what shattered the royal household wasn't the transfer itself. It was the 7 words Princess Anne spoke when William asked if he should refuse. The corridor was empty. No aides, no cameras, no constitutional advisors standing witness. Just a father, a son, and the leather briefcase containing the Crown's most protected authority. Direct access to Britain's intelligence reports, military command summaries, and emergency state powers. Charles set it on the table between them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The case answered every question William hadn't been allowed to ask. Before we reveal what Princess Anne said that changed everything, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next has never been told outside the family. William's first question wasn't about power. It was about time. How long have you been planning this? Charles looked towards the window. Beyond it, the palace grounds stretched out like a living museum of choices made by kings who'd carried this exact burden. Since the morning, I couldn't remember which briefing I'd already read. The admission landed like a stone in still water. William understood immediately. His father wasn't transferring authority because the institution demanded it. He was releasing it before his grip weakened enough for someone else to notice. But there was something the prince didn't know yet. Something that had happened 6 weeks earlier, in the middle of the night, when a military aide knocked on the king's private chambers, and Charles couldn't recall whether he'd already authorised a response to an overseas incident. The aide had waited, increasingly uncomfortable, while the king stared at documents he'd signed hours before but couldn't remember. That aide had gone to William the next morning, not to report the king, to ask what the prince wanted him to do the next time it happened. William hadn't told his father. He'd quietly begun receiving duplicate briefings, a backup system designed to look like expanded training for the heir. But both men knew the truth. The crown had already started moving through 2 hands, and only one of them had admitted it. Now, standing in the same room where Edward VIII had signed his abdication, Charles was making the arrangement permanent. But permanence required more than a father's permission. It required something far more dangerous. The approval of the one royal who had watched every power struggle in this family for 50 years and had stopped more than one from tearing the monarchy apart. Princess Anne was waiting in the next room, and she hadn't decided yet whether to support this or stop it. William didn't know she was there. Charles had asked her to come, but not to intervene, to listen. And if she heard anything that sounded like a son seizing power from a weakened father, Anne had permission to end the entire plan before it reached the Privy Council. The princess sat in the adjoining study, door open exactly 3 inches. Royal training made eavesdropping an art form. She could hear every word, and more importantly, every silence. She'd been against this 48 hours ago. Not because William wasn't ready. Anne had watched her nephew manage 3 major crises in the last year while Charles's team still debated which font to use on official statements. She opposed it because the transition was happening in secret, and secrecy in this family always curdled into scandal. But Charles had convinced her to wait, to hear how William responded when he realised the choice wasn't theoretical anymore. The prince asked the question Anne had been waiting for. "Does anyone else know?" Charles shook his head. "Camilla knows I'm considering a shift. She doesn't know I've already decided." William's expression didn't change, but his posture did. His shoulders dropped slightly, the physical tell he'd carried since childhood when a problem became real. "You're asking me to take authority you haven't told your wife you're giving away. I'm telling you the cost before you pay it." In the next room, Anne leaned closer. This was the moment. If William treated this like a promotion, she'd walk in and end it. If he understood that what his father was actually offering was a shared burden, not a stolen crown, she'd let it stand. William didn't reach for the briefcase. He asked, "What happens the first time we disagree?" Anne exhaled. The boy understood. Charles answered carefully. "Then we disagree in private and present one decision in public, the way your grandmother did with Philip when he wanted to modernise faster than the institution could survive. And if I make the wrong call, then I'll tell you before it reaches the press and we'll fix it while there's still time." William finally looked at the briefcase, not with ambition, with something closer to grief. "This makes you look weaker. It makes the crown stronger. I've stopped caring which one people think I am." The room went silent. Somewhere in the palace, a clock struck 11. A door closed on a lower floor. Outside, a protest about climate policy continued on the far side of the gates, unaware that the man they were demanding action from had just passed the ability to give it to someone else. Anne stood. She'd heard enough. When she walked in, both men turned. William looked caught. Charles looked relieved. The princess didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, the position she'd occupied during every serious family meeting since their mother's death, and asked the only question that mattered. William, if you take this and it destroys your relationship with your father, will you still believe you made the right choice? The prince didn't hesitate. No. Anne turned to Charles. And if you give this away and spend the rest of your reign watching your son receive credit for decisions you taught him to make, will you still believe you did the right thing? Charles met her eyes. Yes. She looked between them. These two men who'd spent their entire lives preparing for roles that never quite fit, and said the 7 words that ended the debate. Then stop asking permission and sign the damned papers. What happened next would rewrite every constitutional manual in the Commonwealth. But first, it had to survive the one person who hadn't been told yet, and who had more reason than anyone to see this as betrayal. Camilla learned about the transition the way most spouses discover life-changing decisions, by walking into a room at the wrong moment and hearing her name. She'd come looking for Charles to confirm an appointment. Instead, she found her husband, his son, and his sister standing around a table covered in documents that carried the Privy Council seal. The Queen Consort was many things. Naive wasn't one of them. How long? She asked. Charles started to answer. Anne cut him off. He signed 20 minutes ago. William takes operational authority tomorrow morning. You're hearing it now because we only just finalised terms. It was the worst possible way to deliver the news, and Anne knew it. But she also knew Camilla. Give her time to feel ambushed, and she'd spiral into hurt. Give her a problem to solve immediately, and she'd shift into strategy. Camilla looked at William. Does Catherine know? Not yet. Then we tell them together. Both families hear it at the same time, or this looks like a coup before it even starts. William nodded. Camilla turned to Charles. You'll issue a joint statement, not William stepping up because you're stepping down. Both of you are expanding the model, shared leadership, not a replacement. Charles exhaled. He'd expected anger. Instead, his wife had just solved the largest communications problem they'd been dreading. Anne almost smiled. I knew there was a reason he married you. Camilla didn't return the smile. She was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Anne, you'll need to make a public appearance with both of them in the first week. If you're not seen supporting this, every outlet will run stories about family fractures. The princess stiffened. She decided performative royalty, but Camilla was right. Fine, 1 appearance, then I'm going back to actual work. 1 is all we need. The 4 of them stood in the kind of silence that follows a battle no one expected to win. Then Camilla asked the question nobody had prepared for. What do we tell Harry? The room froze. Charles hadn't considered it. William had deliberately avoided thinking about it. Anne's face went carefully blank. Camilla pressed. He's going to hear about this, and if he hears it from the press, this becomes a story about family exclusion instead of institutional evolution. William spoke quietly. He'll think I pushed father out. Then you call him, tonight, and you tell him the truth, that Charles asked you and you said yes because someone had to. Charles looked at his wife with something close to awe. She'd just turned a potential disaster into an opportunity for reconciliation, and she'd done it in under 30 seconds. Anne picked up her phone. I'll call him first. He's more likely to listen if it doesn't come from either of you. Nobody argued. Within 2 hours, the plan was in motion. Catherine was briefed in her private sitting room and immediately asked the question none of them had thought to prepare for. What happens to the children's security if William becomes a target for every policy failure? The table went silent. They'd planned for constitutional crises, public backlash, and staff rebellion. They hadn't planned for the reality that increasing William's authority also increased the threat level around his family. Anne made a note. Security protocols get updated tomorrow. Catherine didn't look reassured. By midnight, the new structure was ratified. By dawn, the Privy Council was briefed. By 10 a.m., the world knew. The statement was perfect. Joint leadership, expanded operations, seamless transition. The press didn't care. Headlines screamed, King steps back. William takes control. Within hours, palace sources confirmed William had been receiving duplicate briefings for weeks. The narrative shifted from planned transition to emergency intervention. Anne called William. You need to be seen, today. 2 hours later, he was photographed at a South London youth centre, sleeves rolled up. The photos worked. But that night, a former secretary suggested Charles had been managed out of his reign. Anne released her own statement immediately. What happened was not a removal. It was a decision made by a king who understands the crown is larger than any single person. The narrative stabilised. At an investiture ceremony, Charles and William appeared together. When they were finally alone, Charles spoke first. "I expected relief. I feel loss." "I expected confidence. I feel guilt," William replied. Charles handed him the ceremonial case. "The Crown doesn't care if you're ready. It only cares if you'll serve." 3 weeks later, William resolved a Commonwealth crisis in 3 days, without consulting his father. Charles read about it, marked "Resolved, FYI." Anne found him staring at nothing. "You wanted him to be better than you. You don't get to be hurt when he is." That evening, William called. "Did I move too fast?" Charles could have said yes. Instead, "You moved at the speed the problem required." 6 months later, the system became routine. The dispatch box moved between them with notes in the margins. Questions, suggestions, occasional jokes. The monarchy didn't weaken. It evolved, and only those who paid the cost truly understood.